How's everybody doing this morning? Good. Are you guys ready to learn about stuff? Awesome. Well, as I said, my name is Terry Hale. I'm the Senior Web Development Manager here at Big Wing. I've been kind of doing web stuff, I guess, for, I guess now close to 7 years. Started out selling outsourced web development services, where I kind of learned a lot about the things that people don't think about whenever they're building a website, and moved into project management, and now I'm here.
Yeah, I'm Christina Galonia. I'm the Senior SEO Manager here. Been doing SEO for, gosh, I don't even know how many years. Not too long, 5 years maybe. But been in lots of different agencies, learned a lot fairly quickly, and I really enjoy getting to learn about it. SEO is really interesting. There's something new every day, which I really enjoy, and there's lots of great stuff that we're going to teach you today about it.
So today's 10 things to consider before building a website. Now, first I want to preface this as there are way more than 10 things to consider before building a website. This is a very, very high level, broad overview, just trying to hit some of the things that, that we found tend to either get overlooked or forgot about. You know, a lot of the stuff you're going to see, and you know, I had a mentor one time that would say, well, duh, but he'd call those a blinding flash of the obvious. So whenever you see them, you know, a lot of times you'll be like, well, no, duh, but a lot of times whenever you're in the heat of the moment, you tend to forget those. So first of all, this is what they call, it's called the iron triangle, the quality triangle. Basically, there's different versions of it, but it has good, cheap, and fast. And getting something at all three it doesn't truly not exist, but it's very, very difficult to find, and usually it's because somebody's already done a lot of the legwork. And if you can think of good, you might even swap that out with the scope of the project. So the more things you want to add and do on your website, like e-commerce and things like that, the slower it's going to be to get it, or it's going to cost a lot more to get it done in a reasonable amount of time. So kind of keep that in mind whenever you're first thinking about a web project. So one of the first things you need to think about is, why do you even want a website? You know, there's a lot of reasons. Sometimes you're just bored with it. Sometimes your third cousin twice removed on your mother's side says, your website, I don't like it, I can't find anything. You know, and sometimes maybe you don't have a website. So some of the things you should think about is, what does your current site not do that you need it to do? So maybe there's not clear calls to action. Maybe people can't find the products you're looking for. Maybe your website's so outdated, you haven't updated it, that maybe the product offering is completely out of date and you don't even do some of those things anymore. You know, thinking about what your site does do that it doesn't need to, you know, getting rid of some of that feature bloat. Maybe you have some things on there like an online estimator tool or something like that nobody uses. Go ahead and take that off so you can help reduce some of the cognitive load whenever people are looking at the site. Another thing you have to think about is, sometimes you don't always necessarily need a new site, you just need a content. You know, my mom would call it lipstick and rouge. You know, the bones are good, but you need you know, it just needs a little something.
Yeah, or updating a logo, something like that. So always make sure, you know, it's a lot easier to change those kind of things on a site than to start fresh. So always kind of look at it from that perspective too.
The next thing is goals. You have to have goals whenever you're thinking about building a website, because without goals, your site will lack a vision. It won't have you know, a direction. It should be something that you strive to, and it should really tie into your overall business goals. So you know, think back, you know, if your vision and your mission statement. You know, does your website help achieve that? You can have lots of different goals to think about. You know, who's your target audience or audiences? You might have more than one. You might have, say, a business-to-business side of your business and a business-to-consumer side. You know, what does success look like to you? Everything should go towards those goals.
Mm-hmm. You know, a really good pro tip here, remember that your site isn't for you, it's for your customers and your clients. So make sure you look at it from their point of view and think about them during this process. It's really not about you. So, you know, you kind of sometimes need to step back and think about, if I'm in this client's shoes, what would I do? And what do you want them to be doing on your site? If you're a dentist, do you want them to be making an appointment, making a phone call, coming in to visit you, things like that. So think about those kind of things and the overall goal. Don't just put things on there because you need to put things on there. Yeah. Or you think you need to put things on there.
Yeah, a lot of times when it comes to web development, it's a lot of times less is more, because again, there's only so much somebody can pay attention to and so many actions that somebody can take. And you want, one of the tenets of good design is, you don't want to make your audience and your customers think. You want them to just instinctually know where they want to go and what they want to do. And sometimes I've seen customers sabotage themselves because they have a preconceived notion of what their clients are looking for, or they're not thinking of it from their client's perspective. They're like, well, I know exactly where this is, so I should be able to, they should be able to find it. That's not always true. The next part is you want to vet your vendors that you're going to use. Usually on a website build, even if somebody does everything in-house, they're still going to have vendors that they use. For example, we're here at Big Wing when we're doing website development. We're not a hosting company. We'll still manage and set up the hosting for you, but we go through a third-party company. We happen to use a WordPress specific host called WP Engine. That's really great. But you want to find out, you want to vet those vendors that you're using to make sure that they're on the up and up, that they're not going to abandon you halfway through your project. So a few things you can ask them is, do you do everything in-house? It's not a bad thing if they don't. Sometimes they're hyper specialized, and so they know exactly what they're good at. They know that they're not good at certain things, and they're going to outsource to somebody that they feel is the best. What are we going to do? What happens if you leave? A lot of times, companies will break up with the vendor for a variety of reasons. Either they've outgrown their vendor, or their vendor's outgrown them, or maybe they're dissatisfied on one way or another. But you always want to know what's going to happen to my stuff after I leave. You
want to make sure that you own those properties. That's kind of the biggest question I think I would ask during, to kind of vet what happens if you part ways. Do you own the site? Do they own the site? Do you own the code? Do you own the domain? All those different things are things to think about during that.
Another thing is, check references. You almost have to take that a little bit with a grain of salt, because obviously they're not going to give you a reference that's going to talk trash on them. But it's still a good way. You can still talk through some of those references, and no matter the project and no matter how good a vendor is, there's always going to be hiccups that happen in a project. So that'd be one of the questions to ask those references. Did anything go wrong, and how did they handle it? Because a true test of a good vendor is not that they keep anything from ever going wrong, because that's just unrealistic, but it's how do they handle it whenever something doesn't go to plan.
And an easy way to check out references that they might not have given you is to check out other sites they've built. So not ones that they're necessarily displaying on their site, but other sites that might not be maybe their favorite or their best. Check those out as well. See if you like them. You have to overall like what they're possibly going to deliver to you. That's really important. And also check them out on a mobile device. I think a lot of people forget about that, but we all know we spend a lot of time on our phones. We spend a lot of time checking things, looking at the site on our phone, converting, looking for addresses, stuff like that. So always make sure that their sites are mobile friendly. Super important for SEO, but also just really important for user experience. So you want to make sure you check them out on mobile, make sure they look good, because that could definitely be a red flag if they don't. So number 4, have a plan. This is probably the biggest topic that we could think of, and honestly, we could probably both talk about this for hours, of all the different elements that go into making a plan. So be sure you're hammering out all the details so nothing gets left out. Talk about who's putting content on the page, who's writing that content. If you're getting a new logo, who's making that logo? Are you making that logo? Are you going through another third party? Things like that. You want to make sure that you're getting all of those things hammered out. And kind of the SEO thing here, make sure that you're writing the content on your pages and you have unique content. Don't use that stock content. It's not good for you, and you're just going to end up having to go back and rework it. So go ahead and get ahead of that and either have somebody writing that content for you, a copywriter, like someone that we have here on staff, or if you need to go through a third party depending on your web vendor. Highly recommend doing that. If you can write it yourself, even better, but it makes a big difference for both SEO and user experience. So it's really important to include that as part of your plan.
And kind of going back on user experience, another thing that you might want to do is actually budget for the user testing. User testing can run the gamut from really cheap to really expensive, so it all depends on your budget. But you can at least do something for as little as $25. You can sign up for a thing called UserBob and do a task-based testing where you send a link out to your site and say, hey, do this thing. So maybe, and you want to test some of those calls to action, like you want to find out more information about a XYZ product, so do this. And you can find out, you might not find out every issue that you might have with that, but you can at least find some of the biggest issues that you could have.
It's good to start gathering all of your account information while you're kind of starting this process, to go ahead and start gathering, if you have a current website, your Google Analytics, your hosting account, your domain registrar, your Google Search Console, all of those logins. Go ahead and start kind of creating a repository of those, because it's going to make the future so much easier when you come around to the site launch and getting all those things moving. It'll make those parts move a lot faster in the future.
Yeah, if you have your current hosting information in your domain registrar, you'll give your web company goosebumps whenever they get ready to start doing web development, because it's something that almost never happens. And a lot of times we don't get that until a week before the website's supposed to launch, which is, by that time it's likely going to delay the launch.
So this next one here is the back end easy for you to update? This is really important, especially for people like the SEO team. That's where we're going to be hanging out for most of the time while we're working on your account. So you want to ask the vendor if you can see their back end. It's kind of a red flag if they're like, nah, you don't really need to see that. You should see that because that's where you're going to be making changes. That's where your content team is going to be making changes. That's where your SEO team lives. PPC is going to work around there as well. So you want to make sure that it's user friendly. Ask them if they provide trainings. Ask them about simple things. How would I update a meta description here? How would I change up the copy? If I wanted to, change out this employee image because they no longer work here, how would I do those kind of things? So ask them to kind of walk you through that. And it's great if they do have a training. I highly recommend you would take advantage of it. Even if you do have other vendors and stuff working on your site, it's good for you to also know so that you can have the flexibility to go in and change things as you need.
And when you're building the site, you want to talk through with that vendor of building that backend for the people that are going to be using it. So if you're going to be updating the content, you need to really be involved at every stage of the process when they're building that. Because if you wait till the very end of the project and then you start getting, and then finally get access to the admin and start making changes and realize that it's garbage and you can't find how to find out how to do things, it's going to be really expensive to go back in and make those changes at that stage of the process. So it's really important to be involved in that early on.
I feel like this is a good spot to plug in. WordPress is great, so if you can use WordPress, please do. All your vendors will love you for it. And I know Terry 100% agrees. That's what we work with here, so definitely recommend that if you have that one. Creep on your competitors. So this is actually really important because these are the people who are going to be in those search results with you. These are the people that you are directly competing against. So check them out, vet them, see if they're cooler than yours. Decide what you like about their sites. If you're going through and you're like, man, I think their logo looks great, I love the way you can navigate through their site, write those things down, tell them to your web vendor, tell them to your SEO team, let them know, hey, I really like this site. That makes our jobs a lot easier for us to know, what kind of direction you're thinking of going. Then also tell us what you would change. If you're going through and you really hate a certain feature, you hate where the phone number is and it's really hard to find their address, let us know those things. Those things are really important and those are the people you're directly going after. So you want to make sure that you kind of have that leg up during this web build process. And imagine you're the customer or client. Again, the website is not for y'all. This is for your customers and clients. So how would you navigate to achieve the goals that you want them to achieve on the site? If you're a dentist office, you want them to be making an appointment. So go through those steps. Go through and find, is it easy for me to make an appointment on this site? If not, it's not easy for your customers to make an appointment either. So go through with that eye as well and kind of go through the entire process and see what it looks like there.
And kind of another little pro tip or a trick you can do is you can actually use some of those user testing tools on your competitor sites as well. So if you see a site that you like, pay for a user test on there and have them do some of the same things that you're wanting to be done on your site. Because especially if you're looking at emulating a good portion of that, or that's a site that you like, it's a good way to validate what they're doing and then decide if you want to keep going that down direction or if you want to change it up and do something different. But it's a good way to let them kind of be a beta test for some of the stuff that you're already looking at doing.
Absolutely.
So the other thing to think about is you want to think about the benefits of your site and the value that it adds, not features. Kind of looking at the Swiss Army knife here. There's a lot of features on it, but the knife itself is pretty useless because you're not going to be able to use it. You don't want to get distracted just by the pretty lights. You want to think about adding the value. I don't know who said this. Probably some meme I saw somewhere, but basically, just because it's unique doesn't mean it's useful. You can have the best looking website on the planet. It can be absolutely gorgeous, but if it's not converting, if it's not helping you achieve your goals, then it's useless.
And I think a good example there is kind of that website home slider. A lot of people love to put a homepage slider on their site. But research proves that nobody really goes past that first slider. So who's that slider really for? It's probably for your boss who said, I want to get this on the homepage. You go, cool. You put it in the 7th slider. Nobody's ever going to see it, but your boss is happy. But it's really not for your boss. This is for your clients. So kind of think about those things when you're going through those steps. Think about what your customers actually need, not necessarily just what you think you need. It also slows down your site speed.
The other thing to think about is hosting. Hosting is probably one of the most important parts of your website. You know, and it affects everything, not just the user experience whenever people are coming to your site and how quick it works, but it can also really have a negative impact on your ongoing maintenance costs. A true story, we actually had a client that had a site, I'm not going to mention the host, but it was a very inexpensive host. It was like a $5 hosting. A change that probably should have only taken us about an hour to do, including downloading the site, making changes on a development copy, and then re-uploading it. We ended up spending over 4 hours doing it. With that 4 hours, they could have paid for probably 2 years of hosting on a better host. Instead, all that money got, because we had to babysit the download as well. It wasn't like we could just sit there and forget it because it kept timing out and things like that. So you really, really want to think about the hosting and don't skimp out on your hosting. Another thing that you can do is look into hosts that specialize in whatever your platform that you're working with. Like, so we use WP Engine, they specialize in WordPress. There's Flywheel's another good one for WordPress. If you have some Drupal sites or even custom sites, you can look at places like Liquid Web. They have some hosts that are specific for some of those different platforms, but really think about what you're building on and then pick the host based around that, so that way you can get good support with that.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, site speed is really important for SEO. If someone goes to your site and it's loading really slow, they're going to click right back to those Google results and they're going to go to your competitor. So keep that in mind when you're choosing a host. This makes a huge difference, and it's something that can really impact your site and its performance overall.
The next part is the website launch. This is also one of the most critical stages of the project after planning.
So the biggest thing is really you want to make sure that you have a redirect strategy in place. And this is something to start thinking about even before you start going through the entire process, is figuring out who's going to be doing that, what it's going to look like, all those good things. So basically, you want to make sure that every old URL lines up with the new URL, so that nobody's ever going to hit a page that doesn't exist, at least not for a good reason. Because that can really affect you, and it can really affect you in the search results as well. If you're showing pages that don't exist, people are not going to hang out on your site and try to find the pages that do exist. They're going to get right back out there. So make sure that once you do launch, that they're working. Run a Screaming Frog test. Make sure that everything is working the way that you said it should be working, because that can really, really affect your traffic. We have seen sites that haven't redirected at all, and it makes a huge difference. It tanks your traffic. You lose all your rankings. If you used to rank #1, now you're not going to anymore, because Google notices that that page doesn't exist anymore. So, and it takes a long time to get right back up there. So, super important for SEO. Probably the most important part about launching a site is to make sure that that redirect strategy is sound, that it's working, and that you have it in place before you launch. And the other big part about that, make sure Google can see your site. You would be surprised. We had a client come to us. They had this site built with a third party, and when they came to us, they actually were not in Google at all. So their robots.txt file was completely blocking their site from being crawled. So if you searched just their name or just for their site, they didn't show up. So you're not going to rank for anything. You're not going to get any of that organic traffic. So it's really a huge deal. Make sure that you're not blocking the site. It's really easy to just kind of go in Google and do site : your URL and see if things come up. If nothing comes up, red flag. If most of your pages show up, you should be good. Check in with your web vendor if you notice a few pages missing. It's okay for certain pages to be missing. It could be purposeful, but you want to make sure that the majority of your pages that should be there are there.
And kind of going back to that, another thing that oftentimes gets overlooked, we've even done it ourselves from time to time, is making sure those contact forms that you have, that the emails are getting routed to the appropriate people. Nothing's more frustrating for you or your customer to have a new website up. They're wanting to contact you, and those emails are kind of getting black-holed into who knows where. Maybe they're going to the web developer that had worked on it, and they're probably not looking at that and letting you know. So double check to make sure that you're getting those contact forms. I would even recommend going in and filling it out yourself, or whoever it's supposed to get routed to, have them go and fill it out to see if that routing works. Another thing, it's not a must do, but I really try to avoid launching late on Thursdays or anytime on Fridays. The reason being is especially if you're migrating hosts, the domain name, it can take up to 72 hours to fully propagate around the internet. Now, most of the times it happens a lot faster than that, and usually that 72 hours is to get some of the really super remote places like Madagascar. But if something does go wrong or there is an issue, it's going to be much more difficult for not only for you to probably get a hold of your web vendor over the weekend, but for them to get a hold of some of their partners that might be influencing that issue. So really try to avoid Friday launches if you can.
And maintenance, just because you've launched your site doesn't mean it's done. The work never ends, honestly. There's lots more things that you can continue to do with your site, and you should continue to do with your site, or else, something could go majorly wrong. So talk with your web vendor about who's going to be implementing CMS updates. WordPress has updates that come out
probably at least,
all the time.
At least once a month. Sometimes if it's a security update, that can happen weekly. Or there's been stretches where there's been an update almost every day that's come out. So you really want to make sure that somebody's on top of that, not just for your site's performance, but its security as well.
And also prepare for the future. So if you do happen to launch this site and all of a sudden, it's 10 times better and you're ranking #1 for cat t-shirts online, you want to make sure that you can handle the increase in leads. So kind of think about that stuff. It's not guaranteed, and obviously that's not super normal for you to just kind of jump up and all of a sudden sales go through the roof as soon as you launch a site. But you want to be prepared for it. So think about that. Have a strategy in place. Do you have a plan for fulfillment? Do you have people that can do these sort of things? What's the backup plan? And make sure that your server is prepared to handle that traffic as well.
Another thing is really make sure that you have a staging site. A lot of the premium hosts will throw one in for free, and that's primarily so you can test changes, especially in code. Nothing's worse than updating a shopping cart plugin to realize that your payment processor plugin isn't compatible with that new version, or they haven't gotten it up to date, and then now nobody can check out on your site. So you really, really want to make sure that you're testing any updates in an environment that's not going to affect your site. Now that being said, you can do content updates and things like that. That's okay to do live if you want to kind of see what they look like, especially if there's some design elements. By all means, go ahead and do that on a staging instance of the site. But definitely any code changes, you want to make sure that you're doing those on a staging site before you're actually pushing them live. And you also want to make sure that you're taking backups of your site regularly, a minimum of once a day. More often if you can and if you can afford the space. But a lot of the premium hosts just automatically do a backup. That being said, if you only have one backup of your site and it's handled by your host, then you don't really have a backup. I don't know how many times I've seen a host, the backups get corrupted for one reason or another. So I really recommend if you're like on WordPress, installing a plugin that can help automatically take backups and store them in Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that, just so you kind of have another backup in case your host's backup fails, and then test those backups periodically as well. Have a process for restoring your site from a backup in case something were to happen. Say there's a security vulnerability that doesn't get patched in time and somebody wipes out your site. It's really, really important to know what you're going to do if something like that were to happen, so that way you can quickly recover.
So kind of our last little bit here. Remember, just because the site has launched does not mean the work is done, like we said. Continue to work with your team of digital specialists, like the SEO team, to ensure that your site stays up to date for both Google, your CMS, all the changes that happen, because they all change all the time. It's the internet. Things change without notice, and that's where your digital specialists can really come in to help. So make sure you have that team once you do launch, and that can back you up, that can help you out with things. If you want to make changes on the site, things like that. Really helps to have that team there backing you up. So don't forget that once you've launched the site, because you don't want to have to do a whole new site a year or two later. Sites are expensive. So do your best to kind of maintain that so that you don't have to continually build a new site if something goes wrong or changes.
So any questions?
Those are our 10 tips.
Sure.
Okay, so I build sites pretty much manually with React.js and React Native. Should I build it with WordPress instead?
Not necessarily. So we're fans of WordPress here, but we're also aware that WordPress isn't the best solution for every problem. For example, if you were going to be, WordPress has a shopping cart plugin called WooCommerce. It powers probably, I think, something close to 25% of all e-commerce sites on the internet. That said, one of the things that it's not known for doing well is scaling to very large scale. Like obviously, someplace like Amazon's not going to run their store on WooCommerce. So depending on your needs, pick the platform that makes the most sense for you. It's not always going to be WordPress. It would be naive to think that was a one-size-fits-all solution. That said, if you're thinking of WordPress from 10 years ago or whatnot, it's came a long way from being just a blogging platform. There's a lot you can do with it. And there might even be, maybe you run part of your site off of WordPress. Something that's actually getting very popular to do is what they're calling a headless install. So maybe you use WordPress for the backend, but they've really increased the quality of their API. So that way you can actually have the front end completely separate from it. So maybe you have an e-commerce platform. You could be making API calls to that to handle the e-commerce traffic and have WordPress for your blogging and your other content. So there's a lot of different things you can do. So yeah, WordPress isn't the solution for everybody, but it does. I think it powers something close to at least 25 to 50% of the internet. I can't remember what the last stat was. Don't quote me on it. But
that means I got one more question.
Sure.
Is version control backup as well? You consider that backup as well?
For your site code, yes, absolutely. But I would still but you want to make sure your database, if you're running it off of a database, that you have a backup of that, because that's where where the majority of your content is going to live. Unless you're coding, in flat HTML and you're doing all your content that way. Yeah, I could consider your version control to also be. That's actually a good point. Version control is very, very important whenever you're doing code changes. That way you can roll back on something if there's an issue. Sure.
2 things.
Sure.
Go back to, you said you can use WordPress for a portion of a site, and understand I'm not a developer, so WordPress for a portion, and then the other part written in traditional code, or?
Yeah, or just in anything you want. So, there's like Facebook, for example. Their blog actually runs off of WordPress. Microsoft has a lot of some of their things running off of WordPress, but their whole ecosystem is not necessarily running off of WordPress. So what they do is, I'm not exactly sure what their specific implementations look like, but they might have, if you go to a site/blog, that might take you to a WordPress install, and then the rest of the site could be coded in almost anything else. So that way they're using the WordPress for their blogging, because maybe they have somebody that's not as technically savvy that's going in and doing blog posts, but they need somebody that knows a little more about HTML and things like that, making other changes in other places. It's not super common, but it is something that's possible, and it's relatively simple to do depending on the needs. You just want to make sure that if you have 2 different vendors that are handling both sides of it, that they're at least able to talk, because you don't want them stepping on each other's toes. So it does complicate things, but it is possible.
Okay, and then the last thing, you guys didn't talk about it, but I'm assuming there's some component that for disability services.
Oh yeah. So like Section 508 compliance for especially that's really important for regulated industries and for medical practices, things like that. There's also like the WCAG. I don't remember what the actual acronym stands for, but that's basically for usability for screen readers and things like that. And a lot of people think of accessibility as just for visually impaired. That's actually not true. That can also be somebody that maybe has cerebral palsy, somebody that doesn't have good motor function, and especially if you have a site that is going to be catering to that crowd, you want to really make sure that your site takes that into account whenever you're building it. That's a great point.
Great point.
Sure.
What's the site you mentioned for user testing?
There's one that we've used. It's called UserBob. It's actually, I didn't realize it until after we started using it. It was created by somebody here in Oklahoma. That I think
It's an Oklahoma-based company. They started a couple of years ago. They're great.
Yeah. Are you?
No, I'm not.
Oh, because I've been wanting to meet.
They presented when it comes about a year and a half ago.
Okay, because I've been wanting to meet the guy. So if you were like, oh, that's going to be awesome.
I could probably find his name for you tonight.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's great. It's really low cost. I think you can run. It's kind of what they'll do is you basically create some tasks that you want somebody to do. So it could be. For example, say you have a site that has recipes. You're like, I want to find a recipe for XYZ. So you would kind of give that as a task to somebody. You don't want to try to lead them, like you don't want to tell them, go click on recipes and then click on that. You want to tell them in as the broadest terms possible what you're wanting them to do. And then you basically set them at it. And what it is you'll actually get I believe it's a screen recording of their screen, and they'll be narrating what they're doing. So they'll be getting their thought process. Because a lot of people will think of, they'll just look at that quantitative data, so they'll just look at Google Analytics and this page is getting so much traffic, not realizing that the only reason why it's getting that much traffic is because it's the only page somebody can find. So it helps you get that qualitative piece. So that way you know why that's happening from somebody. Yes?
So, okay, you've talked a lot about SEOs, but you haven't really talked about SEOs. I know when we first did our website, initially we had, search engine words that we could put in. Now, our host doesn't do that anymore. We outsource that. So that's kind of the new, and as you said, it changes every day. So what's the best option for doing something like that? For adding,
for meta
adding
keywords?
Adding keywords for that.
I guess so do you mean like the actual putting meta keywords on the site?
Yes.
Okay, so that's something that we actually don't recommend doing anymore. As of 4 or 5 years ago, mostly because it doesn't actually do anything for the search engines when you just kind of list out the different keywords that you want your site to rank for. It also lets your competitors know exactly which words you're looking for. So we actually don't do them at all anymore. So we kind of completely exclude those. That's likely why they don't include those anymore, is that they're kind of leaning towards that practice. You still see it on some older sites, and some SEOs still do it, but it's really not recommended. That actually is not taken into account in the Google algorithm for ranking.
Yeah, I think probably the most important part is to have those keywords in your content. Now that you can say you don't want to keyword stuff where all of a sudden, I'm sure everybody's seen the page where they just keep mentioning Oklahoma City, blah, 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 like 14 times in the post. You want to make it real, where it's realistic and it flows.
Yeah.
But you also want to make sure that the things that people are searching for are referenced in your site. And that really goes back to thinking about your website is not for you, it's for the people, for your customers. You might have some really hyper specialized widget that you sell. And so you're thinking, people are going to be searching for that widget. Well, really, they're probably going to be searching for how to do whatever that widget does or how to solve that problem. So, if you think of a hammer and a nail, people aren't going to necessarily, they're not wanting a hammer and they're not wanting a nail. They're wanting to hang a picture on the wall. So, think about it in those terms.
And you'll include those keywords in other places, like he said, like in the content, title tags, meta descriptions, H1s, things like that, URLs throughout the site. So instead of just simply listing them, you'll just start incorporating them more naturally throughout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Cool.
Well, thank you all for coming. And like I said, if you have
Yeah.
any questions, reach out.